We are now going to discuss the conversation that has been, of course, grabbing the nation's attention and energies for the last X number of weeks, and it's going to happen for a couple more weeks. And this is the budget of the Republic. Yesterday, members of Parliament burnt the midnight oil, literally, and they passed the finance bill. They discussed it clause by clause, and in the very end, the person who was finally at the chair, the Gilgil Member of Parliament, gave a report to the Speaker of the National Assembly. The Committee of the Whole House, Mr. Speaker, has deliberated on this particular bill and has passed it with several amendments. So that's it. Business done. Government has budget for the next financial year. We are now joined by Wangari Muikia, who's a public finance management specialist at EGCL Institute. Good morning, Wangari.
Good morning.
Good to have you after like 3 years.
It's not been 3 years. It's not been 3 years. But it's been a while, it's true.
Okay, it wasn't 3. No, let's make it 6 then.
Is that better?
You're like the finance bill. You're just angry.
Who gets it?
If you don't like this one, how about that?
Let's give you options.
Yes, let's give you more options. Good to have you back.
Thank you for having me back.
Karibu sana. City has the day's proverb, and this week's proverbs, City, are from?
There's this country in East Africa. You may have heard of it. It neighbors Somalia. It neighbors Uganda, Tanzania, and the Indian Ocean.
As well as Ethiopia and South Sudan.
Well, those other countries come in as well, yes. It has many neighbors, that country. It's called Kenya. Yes. So the proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Kenya. Okay? No matter how tall your grandfather is, you have to do your own growing.
Truer words have not been spoken. Although I don't know if everybody practices it. I think essentially it's you or we need to stand on your own feet. You need to chart your own path. Although genetics does play some role, if your grandfather is tall, there could be a possibility that you could be tall, and maybe that talks to perhaps like generational wealth.
Yeah, but you have to grow.
Yeah, but you still have to grow. Yeah, yeah.
You went into genetics. There's something called recessive genes. There may be someone in your lineage who was not so tall. And that
it could manifest.
That by chance may fall on you. So everyone is tall except you.
My
I know,
goodness.
it does happen.
And then you are not so tall. Yes.
And everybody says stories about you.
And then they even question, Kweli?
Huyu ni wife familia
Your father is there. Ask your mom. Everybody, ask your mom.
Ask her where dad was around this time.
It's the mother who knows.
Maternity is a matter of fact.
Yes.
Paternity is a matter of choice.
Paternity, it's a matter of faith.
It's opinion.
A good one.
Wangari, so the conversation around the finance bill and the conversation about, the budget has been the big one. Yesterday, members of Parliament actually sat through and went through clause by clause, introduced amendments, voted on each clause. In the amendments, several amendments were being introduced. Some were passed, some were rejected. And then we now have a finance bill. Now, let's start with that basic one. What does it mean when we say we have a finance bill?
So essentially, a finance bill is it goes hand in hand with a budget, right? So a budget lays out what your plans and expenditures are for the year. What you want to spend on salaries, what you want to spend on infrastructure, like things like education, agriculture, etc. Because you have to function during the year and you have to provide services and you have to live, essentially. The question is, how do you finance them? How do you pay for those things? And then a finance bill essentially lays out a plan for how it's going to adjust taxes, fees and levies, adjust them or introduce new ones or delete old ones that may not be appropriate to finance that bill. Now, the finance bill is actually a very particular animal. It's actually called a Statutes Amendments Act, right? So what it does, it picks taxes from different laws around in the legal framework and changes the values and definitions and structures within those different legal frameworks. So if a layman just decided to look at the finance bill, it would be so hard to understand because it says this adjusts section this of the Tax Procedures Act. So you have to go to the Tax Procedures Act, you have to look at it, you have to edit. So it's not a very accessible document. But thank goodness we have a lot of firms and CSOs and the like who actually break it down for us and say, this is actually what it says. So the finance bill, now the Finance Act, is how we're going to raise money to finance our expectations for the year.
Okay. It has a firm start date, right? It comes into effect, on the 1st of July, does it not? Does it also mean that it has a firm end date, 30th of June, the following year?
It should. And actually, the way it is in the law is a budget. Typically, it's a budget first that is deliberated, and then after the budget, I think about a month after the budget is when the finance bill is reviewed. So you agree on the budget, you say this is what we want to do, and then once everybody agrees on that, then now they say, okay, this is how we're going to finance it. A peculiarity, I guess, of this year is that we tabled both at the same time, for better or for worse, because I know there was a lot of interaction on the finance bill, which was excellent. I think we've not really seen this kind of level of engagement. I think it speaks to a lot of the work that has been done in sensitizing people, but also people are like, hey, there's something wrong. We need to know where you're taking this money. Plus, all these scandals are happening. We need to know what's going on.
Sure.
But there was a lot of debate around the Finance Act. But I don't think there was as much debate around the budget to ask ourselves, where are we spending? Maybe it's a result of the budget process. The budget process starts, essentially in August, right?
Yep.
So, and there's different levels of participation. So the assumption is that people have engaged with it enough and understand, what is in that budget. I think the reality is probably people do not really know what's in that budget, but are more concerned around how much are you taking from me this year, how much are you taking from my paycheck?
Sure.
Now, linked to that, even though essentially what should happen is that, yes, people are taking, or the government is taking X amount from your paycheck, but the reason for existence of government is that it takes an amount from your paycheck, so it takes from this side, but it should give you on this side. Yeah, so I'm taking 30% from you, from your income tax, so that now I can provide you education, I can provide you social security, I can provide you, agriculture, whatever it is. Yeah, and our challenge here in Kenya and in many other countries, but particularly for us in Kenya, is that we don't necessarily see that linkage. Yeah, we pay so much from our resources, but when we go on the streets, we're finding the roads mostly unpaved. We're going healthcare. We're just seeing scandals. We can't get healthcare paid for. The plants are not growing fertilizer. Kenya Power is taking an extra amount. So that linkage is becoming very hard to identify, to align.
Okay, can you? So the finance bill essentially will then dictate how you will spend, where the money will come from. Outside of that, so this is, and for me, it's aspirational, isn't it? Because you're not sure. You will say that we will get from here, here, and here. If the conditions being set out at the point where all of that is being tabled, if the conditions remain as we have forecasted, then we will get. It is aspirational. It is not castings. It is not sure. What happens then to still remain sound if that money that you seek to finance the budget then is not forthcoming? For example, the money that KRA was supposed to collect until June 30th has not been realized. And in the last reading of the budget, we knew that a certain amount of money would come from KRA collections, domestic tax collection. So if that does not happen, what does that portend for this bill, which has been set out to finance the budget? Are you left in a lacuna status in terms of paper? What does that mean?
So this happens to us every year. It happens at the national level, it happens at the subnational level. We say, this is our lovely budget, this is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to raise the resources for it. And then throughout the year, we raise resources, but we never reach the target. We never reach our targets. So what happens, the way government operates is that, government still spends. As long as you have a budget, you can commit expenditures based on that budget. So people will say, okay, in this budget, I'm going to build a road, right? So they build the road on the promise of payment. But if you don't reach your target, there's a chance that you may not get, the contractor may not get paid. And then that results in a pending bill. That gets carried over to the next year and should be paid in the next year. But, we've been having a lot of challenges with our pending bill arrangements. So we've never been able to reach our targets, but we also have supplementary budgets. So every time we have to revise and say, okay, we're not able to reach this. Even the revenue estimates sometimes are revised. And sometimes that comes late in the day. I mean, the other day we were just doing a revision of the finance bill, and this is like a few weeks to the end of the fiscal year. So they keep revising and revising. So even if we've had so much debate and engagement around the finance bill and the budget, this is not the end. We, in a few months we may see edits to that finance bill. And I think if we've been as engaged now, we hope that people will continue to be as engaged in those supplementary processes.
Yeah.
What is best practice? For example, how many supplementary budgets should ideally be brought forth by a government within a financial year?
There shouldn't be many. From a fiscal discipline perspective, there shouldn't be many. And actually, we just did what's this assessment called the Public Expenditure Financial Accountability Assessment. And one of the parameters is how often does the country revise its budget. And the parameters, I think, it's if you get an A if it's less, if you don't, you get a B if maybe it's once or twice, you get a C if it's more than twice, and then from then on. And so it ideally should not be more. You shouldn't edit your budget at all.
Already we're at C.
But I think
because we are talking about the third supplementary budget.
And that's already now starting to stretch it. It should not be. 3 is already starting to have signals of fiscal indiscipline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should there be, it happens. So we see at the beginning of the financial year, this year, for example, revenue projections are at 2.8 trillion shillings? Then you'll see progressively that being revised and mostly downwards. In the last financial year, we started at 2.5. We went to 2.1, 2, and the actuals are likely going to be about 1.9. Okay? What should that tell the budget makers, the policy makers and the budget makers about the capacity to raise your revenue, and therefore about how much you should target for the next financial year?
I mean, people have been talking about how this particular budget, I think, raises the target by about 17%, right? Historically, we've never been able to reach even the budgets that we've set for ourselves. And so then we start revising downwards, as you said. So I think revising downwards, so we should be telling ourselves is we need to be a little bit more realistic about how we set our budget and how we set our finance bills. We have, and sometimes it's a bit puzzling because, I mean, everybody sees these trends. We have very, very smart people in Treasury. We have smart people in the ministries. But sometimes you wonder if this is just a tool it can be used as a political tool to say, these are the grandiose things that we're doing. And then when when the spotlight is off, you start to revise downwards, because not many people at the end of the day say, we didn't reach our target. It's only maybe the technical people who notice those things. But everybody else is focused on the big numbers at the beginning of the year. So, fiscal discipline is a challenge. We need to be more realistic, but there's a play between politics and technical, right? So the politics sometimes at the end of the day wins, and the technical people, in as much as they try to push back or propose other things and do the analysis. I worked in Treasury before, so I'm very confident in a lot of the people there. But you find some of their proposals don't see the light of day because the politics does what the politics does.
I'm looking at fiscal year 2021-2022, and we saw at the end of that year that there was money that came in from the World Bank, which was going to then allow for budget completion, right? So there was money that came in form of a loan that was then going to be able to use to complete the fiscal year. Now, as you say, we see the trends over and over and over again, year on year. Meeting the budgets has been impossible. But still, in the next year, there is a huge a number added on top of another number. And we talk about there are folks who know what should be done. Why then? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. Why would you know very well? We have not made budget for last year. In August, the budget process really kicks in. Why would you have such an inflated budget if you know very well you can see the end? We've not reached it. Why would you make something put something even larger on top of the shoulders of an economy that is already having a difficult time to then be able to raise domestically or internationally? I would want to understand the sense behind that. I don't get it.
You know, you alluded earlier, you said earlier, some of these documents are aspirational, right? So we say, even with the budget process, you go around the country and you talk to different people and different stakeholders, and they push and say, we want this in our budget, we're going to do this here. And then you couple that with GDP growth. They say, okay, now our GDP could do better. In fact, we are exporting more. In fact, the rains have been good this year, so we think that it will be strong. So we think that we're going to be able to generate this income, and we're going to be able to meet our expenditure needs, to meet the budget, and so it can be a mix of you have to, what you should do is actually look at the trends, see what has happened in the previous years, also look at the current macroeconomic indicators, GDP, what inflation is doing, exports are doing, the current account, etc., and then even global, because the global market also affects our economy. So it's a mixture of those things, but it still doesn't make sense why we keep increasing our budget. Another thing government keeps talking about is, we're going into fiscal consolidation. But fiscal consolidation is two-pronged, right? So you have to lower your expenditures as you increase your taxes or your revenues, so that now together you're able to control the fiscal deficit and control inflation. But all we're seeing is taxes going up and up and up. We were told at the beginning of this administration that the expenditure was going to go down, but we're seeing it going up in the same trend, the same growth rate as previously. Now, maybe you understand, the new administration were making promises that they didn't really understand what was happening, but you wouldn't expect that the growth of the budget would be at par with what the growth has been before. Maybe it should be less, maybe tempered.
Sure.
And then we hear all the stories about, it really is disheartening when you really seeing how Kenyans are being taxed and a lot of money is coming out of their pockets. And by the way, we're not even talking about the counties. Counties are also there ready for own source revenue. They're like, once you finish here paying your PYE, we also want you to, So
ukinunua mboga unalipa tax.
Exactly. So I lost my train of thought, but I think all of those things start to play into the thing.
Is it possible? I mean, we talk about it here. Maybe we can be accused of pontification, but we talk about it all the time, and we say, look, it's absolutely possible for you to cut down on expenditure. Some of these things we see being spent, because this is right where we are right now, where the country is. Is it possible for a nation, taking all of these things in consideration, you have the public service to take care of, you have state offices to take and departments to take care of, you have ministries which have dockets, from here till the middle of the galaxy, to take care of. Is it possible for a nation, for a government then, looking at your fiscal liability, responsibility, to say we are going to reduce significantly on expenditure and actually survive and now start to claw to get to a place where you meet budget. Is it possible?
I think it's possible. I mean, if you look in the Uhuru years, if I may call it that, even the Kibaki years, there was a lot of investment in infrastructure. And as you know, infrastructure is very expensive, which is why we got into the loan situation. And now we have the SGR, the superhighways and things like that. But now we're seeing a shift to more, with this new budget, we're seeing a shift to prioritization around the social sector, so agriculture, education, health, etc. And those, according to what I've seen in the budget documents, we're not doing a lot of infrastructure development spending there. It's a lot more kind of recurrent spending, grant making. We talked about the community health workers. We're talking about HELB and all of those things. Those are not really capital intensive. So if capital intensive projects have kind of been dealt with, and we're kind of doing the repercussions of that is paying the debt, then we can see a tempering down of the budget, because you're not going to, I mean, of course you still have to maintain and continue with making sure that the infrastructure continues to work, but it wouldn't be as the initial sunk cost of building the actual road. So there is space for rationalization. But the other thing is, I remember hearing Wangari Muikia talking about this once, about budgeted corruption. And budget corruption can be a really tricky animal because, rent seekers and different types of individuals in that space actually pre-identify projects that they want to earn,
to be involved
to be involved in. And so they, even at the beginning, corruption has become so sophisticated. So even when you look at the budget, you're like, oh yes, we are going to build a dam. This is fantastic. Maybe the costs of that dam might have been cheaper if we had done it the proper way, as opposed to someone who is like, we're going to do it this way, and this is how much it costs, and this is how much it's going to be our cut. So if we are able to interrogate the budget, and also projects that are stalled, there's a lot of that. There's staff hiring freezes. There's a lot of things that can be that looked at that can help us reduce our budget. It just can't be that if we assume that, or if we see the way we've been spending previously has included potential corruption scandals and misuse of resources, or inappropriate use of resources, that if we are in a situation where we're looking at that and repairing that we can't rationalize the budget down.
Wangari Muikia is our guest this morning. She's an economist, trained among the best, worked in the big ones, the IMFs, the national treasuries and such. And now she heads an institute called the EGCL Institute. She is here. She's our guest. We're looking at our budget making process and our public finance management. And as we take this break, think about how much has been passed, in terms of the budget at a national level. Just remember, counties are next. Counties also have to do their budgets. They will also have their own finance bills at the county level. They've got to seek ways of raising their own source revenue. That will be another conversation. Wangari, you've talked about, it's possible for us to rationalize our budget, spend less. And then you're faced with a reality. Reality number one is the law. Not less than 30% of that budget must go to development. And then you are then faced with the other reality. The people that you have working for government that you need to pay, the expenses that you need to pay, the recurrent expenditures. Then you add in the debt that you have to repay. So, for example, if you look at the expected expenditures in the next financial year, about 1.7 trillion going to debt. Something like that. Then now put in salaries, add everything else that you're doing, fueling vehicles, paying electricity, blah, blah, this and the other. That obviously has already hit over 2 trillion, Bob. So if that equates 70%, you add another 30%, you'll end up with a very high budget. Plus you have to think about the promises that you made, the pledges that you made. You campaign on a certain platform, you've got your administration, and these things that you wanted to do, you have to start them now, or else you won't finish them. How then do you rationalize a budget? With all those realities, political realities in place. There's some
direction that was given to us. I hesitate to call them conditionalities, but I guess that is what they are. You look at interactions with the IMF. And they've pointed to some areas of rationalization or consolidation. So there was the issue around Kenya Power and Kenya Airways. Because they are partially state-owned. And the question is, should they continue to be partially state-owned? Is there a path for them to just be privatized and to continue their provision without government stake for government? Plus, it's also it can be very draining to our resources. There's also a question around whether our wage bill is too bloated. Yeah, do we have too many people working in government? That's exacerbated by the fact that we have issues around ghost workers. We have issues around emoluments that include allowances and per diems and those types of things. And I think there's a lot of space for us to think about how we can rationalize along those lines.
Politically, how realistic is it?
Politically, it's difficult. I mean, not many people have been able to do it. But at the end of the day, those are the hard choices that a government needs to. I mean, the government already has made some very hard choices. I mean, they stripped away the subsidy on fuel, and at the petrol station, we're paying really high prices. We're seeing a lot of austere measures being introduced into our lifestyle.
Are they really austere, Wangari?
They're austere in the sense that a lot more is coming out from us to kind of maintain our lifestyle. So I think, for example, removing the subsidy, in my view, is not a bad idea, because I don't think we should persist in a kind of a market-distorted environment. But at the same time, doing it that way already tips people into a precarious situation.
There's this situation that has brought about a lot of debate, and we keep talking about, and that taxes going up. The rationale seems to be, if people are taxed more, the government ought to collect more. Meaning, the more you expect citizens to pay, it should translate into you getting more money. Question number one, does it really translate? Because if we talk about austerity measures, I would assume austerity measures involve spending less. Now, when you say the government has removed the subsidy, we are saying the government was spending on this subsidy. This subsidy, the fuel thing, I never understand it. And the reason why I don't understand it is because I look at fuel, the cost of fuel landed, all those God knows how many taxes that are heaped onto it at the end of it, whether it's road, whether it's this, whether it's stabilize, whatever you call it. Then the government says they're subsidizing. What exactly are they doing to subsidize this fuel? What do they do? Because I am of the lay opinion that the person who goes to fuel their vehicle is already paying. So if they're paying,
how is it a subsidy?
Yes, exactly. It's something that I find puzzling, but I'm told it's a subsidy. Okay? I also find it puzzling when we are told that some country has, for instance, donated fertilizer to us free of charge. And then the government says that they're subsidizing this free fertilizer and that they're only going to charge 3,000 or 3,500. These things I find very puzzling because subsidy, the way I understand it, you collect taxes from us. You remove these taxes to prevent certain costs from being what they are by paying into it, either by reducing the taxes or by paying whoever it is who produces it, or by enabling them through whatever instrument you have so that the eventual cost is less. That's how I understand it. But evidently I don't understand this thing at all. So, if we are saying we are being taxed, if we are saying we now have a budget and we know where it's at, and we are saying that we've set in place things that are supposed to help us raise more money, are these taxes necessarily going to translate in the government actually collecting more money?
That's a good question. And if you think if you take a few steps back and you think about what we've been trying to put in place to make sure that we have good tax policy, is actually to put in a tax policy, right? Taxes should have certain characteristics. They should be predictable, they should be neutral, they should be simple, there should be equity factors in there. So if we have a tax regime that every year keeps wildly changing, it becomes very difficult in terms of an investment environment for people to want to invest here, because, it's unpredictable. You may put a heavy investment in the country, and then the next year that heavy investment is loss-making because a tax has been applied to it. So tax policy, I think, is one of the key things. I mean, although it is policy, it's not law, right? So, but it should give us some direction. And the government also talked about a medium-term revenue strategy to put in place so that we can have some predictability when it comes to how the government raises taxes or revenues. But now the question around, if you increase tax rates, does that mean you get total an increase in total tax? And that's not the case. There's a concept in economics called the Laffer Curve, right, where there's a point of maximization of total revenues that you reach. If you increase revenue rates more than that, you actually get less revenues because you start having tax evasion. People start putting their money in different instruments outside the country or whatever it is. Yeah. So the expectation or the hope is that the good people in government have been doing this analysis and asking themselves, well, at what tax rate can we maximize our revenues? If you look at the tax regime right now, it's terribly complicated. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I read it and I'm a professional in this space, and it takes me a while before I can actually penetrate what is happening. And that is not good for an economy like ours.
I want to go back to something that you touched on that we keep having a conversation about. I mean, people throw it at us all the time in terms of, well, Kenya is not the highest tax country in the world. But you pointed out something that, look, if you're going to collect, then there should be reciprocal measures that we see on the other side. Taxing to the point whereby there's certain things then that the citizen should not then have to go out of pocket again to achieve, whether it is medical care, whether it is education, whatever it is, that you should actually see that, for example, the majority of your school-going children go to public schools because the infrastructure is so solidly founded. Because of this money that comes from taxes, you can make sure that you have proper infrastructure, that people do not have to go and seek further private medical insurance because the public system works. But right now what we are seeing is that the majority of the money that is collected, that is said will be used to finance budget, is going towards the payment of debt. So it is impossible for those things to happen at the measure to which they should be happening because the money goes towards servicing debt. How do you turn around, how should a responsible government begin to turn around that situation? Because the truth of the matter is, no matter how thin we slice it, no matter what color we try to paint it, that taxes collected in this country do not go towards the first thing that they ought to be.
You're 100% right. And I always have a challenge with that because in places, in jurisdictions, and a lot of European countries fall into these categories, they're taxed out the wazoo. People are paying like majority of their money to government. But on the other end of the scale, their schools are excellent, top in the world. They have healthcare. They go to university for free. They go to primary, secondary school for free. Buses sometimes are free. Yeah, so all the things that they would be paying out of their own pocket, actually the government is providing. And that would be a scenario that we would like to see, even to some extent. You don't have to do everything. Yeah? Just give us something. Show us, if you're taking from one side, give us on the other side. So I think that can be a challenge.
That is where we let our leaders off the hook. We don't want some of it. We want all of it. We want a plan.
CC doesn't want just the
No. We want all of it. We want you to tell us the plan you have and how we're going to get it. It can't all be given to us at a go. We get that, but we must know. In this year, we will get this. The larger plan is for us to get this. Next year, you will get this. The following year, we will get this. Because in all these intervening years, there is no time we are not paying taxes. When you introduce anything new, there is no time it doesn't impact our lives, none whatsoever. So essentially, we participate with you in this process. We do our bit. Now, your bit is, remember, we're not saying, tell us that this is what we're saying. We know what we need. Health, education, these are basics. Tell us, when it comes to health, this is what we are going to get. Don't tell us UHC. That's not telling us anything. That's telling us there is a map. Okay, map for what exactly? How are we going to get it? And when will we get it? And when you say we've got it, what are the indicators that we'll have received it? So we know this year, this is what we get. The following year, this is what we get. Now that makes sense. So when we pay, we know, last year, they said we're going to get this, we got it. I'll be very...
But it's all there.
Yes.
CT. It's all, like if you look at the budget policy statement, if you look at the budget, it says this is how we're going to spend our money. The trick is, how do you link the finance bill with the budget in a meaningful way, right? So if we're saying, okay, the government is now prioritizing the social sectors, we're seeing more money going to agriculture, health, education. You're like, okay, fantastic. That seems like, it seems to me on the face of it that I will be able to afford now these things because I'm paying for them. Now I should, in this year, be able to achieve or go to school. But the thing is, if you look in the budget, they'll say, okay, we're spending more in health. What are they spending in health? You look at the budget policy statement, we're hiring more community health workers. Okay, how does that help me? Like, okay, yes, that will help people in the community health workers largely are in Mashinani, going to houses and homes and supporting with healthcare. Yeah.
Yes.
So kind of a fast level of health. But
Yes.
how is that really helping? Like, if you say, okay, we're doing more in the value chain in agriculture, because this better thing, the bottom economic transformation, whatever, talks about value chain. Okay, I'm giving money now today. How is this value chain going to help me today in this year, right? Yes, there is merit in saying we're building something. In the next 5 years, we should have it. But the truth of the matter is the pinch is being felt now. So how are you providing a safety net or some sort of reprieve for me in this year for me to be able to survive and be able to have that resource going forward for me and my children?
How would you prescribe, though? I mean, I think that's the question. That we see the problem, we see the hole, we see the gap, and we say, okay, this is not what it should be. So even if we were to say, I mean, if it was Wangari in that seat today, a professional of your own right, and saying, look, here we are with this problem, what would be the one thing that you say, let us introduce this to then? Because look, we can even assume that maybe they don't know. I mean, I refuse to believe that they do not know what could be done in terms of solutions. But let's just assume that, okay, maybe we can shed light on that. Because sometimes when we think about the solution, that gives you a little bit more hope, right? What could be some of the solutions that we talk about? If they say, look, we're going to put money towards this, whereby it's not helping the now, what would be a solution for the now? There's a report today talking about 19 million Kenyans who are living in poverty. A third of the population today in Kenya lives in poverty. If I don't know what would be a greater slap in the face to a government today than that. So the question is, what can be done for the now? What are some things that can be done for the now?
I tell you, what can't be done is building you a house. I think there's much been said about the housing levy and this 1.5 tax thing. And sometimes it also helps, it puzzles me because some of the policies or the ideas really are not congruent with what makes economic sense. Yeah. So if we say, yes, we're going to take 1.5 to do the housing levy because, people are poor, there are 19 million people in poverty, we need to make sure that they're housed. Fine, you build someone a house. I give someone in poverty a house. What have you actually done, right? This person now has to pay property tax. This person now has to pay elec. This person has to get furniture. This person has to really invest in that household for them to actually call it a house. You can't just give a person a shell of a house and then purport to have housed them, right? So that actually might even sink people further into poverty by not being able to, take advantage of the resource that they have been given. So linking, I think if it was me, I would try to make a better link between first of all, looking at the investments that have already been done. We've borrowed so heavily for these roads and for SGR and stuff. How are we going to... And the promise was that our economy was going to thrive, right? what are the challenges or the obstacles to achieving the thriving of the infrastructure that we've invested in? Yeah, so how do we start to build upon that infrastructure? How do we use the social sectors? How do those social sectors then benefit from the infrastructure that we've built? How does that affect us in the economy at large? So even as they're talking about value chain and linkages, I don't really see evident linkages between what we've invested in and what we're doing now. It seems very much in the narrative is very much like, oh, that was at the older regime, wale walifanya hivyo, let them, in fact, they messed up the economy. Now, us guys, we're doing this. It doesn't make sense for us to be like, we invested in that, now we're done with that. Now let's go here and do this. There must be some linkages to what we're doing so that we build upon, but it's just like if you build a house. You're building a house, you build a nice sitting room, a nice kitchen, then just about to build a bedroom, you're just like, see, we wanted a swimming pool. Let's go build a swimming pool. Hauna kitanda, you don't have a bed, you don't have you have to be focused. Build upon what you have, and then as you go, maintain what you have, and then expand.
One got to consider this, huh? This conversation we sometimes have here, I like them and they make sense to me. But the thing that concerns me, how does the person who has slept hungry understand this conversation? This is, I think, what you're saying. How does it, all these things, how does it relate to this person? Because, yes, it's a plan. Yes, there's a structure. Yes, there's a framework. Yeah, we get all that. But translate it into the day-to-day lives of the citizens of this country. How exactly do they see this money of theirs working for them? How is it demonstrated? Today we're talking about food, feeding children in schools. And it's only in public schools. And we're commenting that it is interesting that this area of Imara Daima, Lindi, you go up to Pipeline, you don't find any public school. And you wonder, the population there is tremendous. So now, what should we be concerned about? Building more schools, ensuring that people actually, meaning there are conversations within conversations. And as you speak and as you say as an economist, what you people try to do is to understand that with these resources that we have, how do we equitably divide it so that people get to benefit from this? Now, but before people benefit, should they not understand this thing? Because where I was going with my conversations, I feel when the government communicates, they're communicating to some people who understand what they're saying, but the Mwananchi doesn't get. I'm speaking about myself as a Mwananchi. I don't quite get how it is I'm supposed to benefit from all this. I hear the conversation, and I'm told I'm going to benefit. I hear that, but I don't see the manifestations of this benefit and how it will come about. I do not get.
Well, it should be evident, right? Ideally, if you have, if you have a budget,
immediately,
and people are invested in the budget making process, and assuming people understand what the government or the regime, local government, whatever, have promised them. And you go for, if you go Mashinani, you find a lot of people actually where they participate. They go for the barazas. They say this is what we want, but the challenge is, even as they voiced what they want, they don't follow up to see whether if what we have said we want is actually in the budget. So we say we need a new town hall or we need a new morgue, and the guy is like, yes, we've noted it down, but the next time they interact with the budget is when it has been passed, and the assumption is that, we asked for a morgue, they said they noted it down, so we expect that there's going to be a morgue. Not really understanding that actually the budget is a negotiated process, right? If you want a morgue, then maybe you're not going to be able to have a school or something like that. So those kind of balances, sometimes citizen engagement, citizen participation is increasing, but it is not yet at the level. We have things like, even if you have a citizen budget, a lot of people don't speak English. Maybe, you need to translate it into, and that costs resources, and the government is cash strapped.
The government is cash strapped?
Yes.
Which government?
Our government is
this one?
Strapped,
No, they're not strapped. They seem to have money for everything except things which are important.
Which really matter.
Yeah. There's always money for all sorts of things. I mean, there is absolutely no sign that we're about to grind to a halt. I mean, a few salaries delay here and there. So what? People get paid at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, the government, it's a finite budget. It's a zero-sum game, right? So if you're going to do one thing, you can do another.
Does this government understand that this budget is finite? Because if I look at the activities of this particular government, it's like...
they're doing things.
Yeah, if you just keep spending, don't worry, more money will come. So you just go ahead and spend because more money will come.
There's a point that the two of you are raising, and this is, whether as the government is initiating these projects, as the government is allocating money to these projects, people actually understand the benefit and whether they can translate and feel the benefits immediately. And it just takes me back to the Kibaki. So we talk about the golden Kibaki years. When Kibaki was campaigning, even as far back as 92, 97, he kept talking about revenues and our revenue capacity. And he was talking, actually, he focused on, he balanced it between, we collect a lot more than what is announced, so there are leakages in revenue, and we have a capacity to collect even more. And so
collect and retain even more.
And retain more.
Yes.
And so that's why we saw, now looking back, we saw the revenues rising in the Kibaki years. But he also talked about what needed to happen. When the roads were being constructed and people were being disadvantaged, just being moved from where they are and experiencing dust and delays, people were wondering, these roads that this man is doing, how? Life is expensive. I need unga today. Why is this man focusing on putting tarmac? What's tarmac going to help me with? But then now, later we realize it. So maybe it's the same thing even for the previous administration, for this current administration and future administrations. It's what you're doing is futuristic, yes, the value chain approach and all those things. But how do you get the population to move along with you, to understand that this one you may not see the benefit of it now, but you will see the benefit of it in 3 years' time?
I think it's true. It's kind of like make it make sense, right? So you say, and unfortunately, this is what happens. People have needs now. People are hungry now, and if you're investing in a road, it may not really make sense to you why your hard-earned shillings are going to that asset, but eventually it does. Yeah, but I mean, I think most of us had a good idea that this was infrastructure was expensive, and we were paying out the wazoo for it. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that's an allowed term on radio, but
I'm smiling because I have really no idea what it means, but it sounds okay.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we know that our roads are at that time, our roads were really bad. Our cars were suffering from it. We were not able to get our goods from point A to point B without spending exorbitant amounts of money. And now it's much cheaper. So we kind of knew that this is a good investment. Even though we complain, we know this is a good investment. And then now we say, okay, now how do we then build upon that? And maybe to some extent, the government has thought about it. If you think about agriculture, some investment in agriculture. Now access to healthcare may be easier in terms of actual physical access. Thinking about, education and things like that. If there are linkages from that perspective, I think they need to make it a little bit more obvious. One thing that has also come up, I keep thinking about it because it's been in the news about the NHIF and the challenges around NHIF. Yeah. I did a lot of work in the counties and I went to see how they're dealing with NHIF, and actually the challenges are immense, and I hope that we can talk about that. I think after the
come again soon.
Right? Oh, actually, after next day.
Don't take 3 years to.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.